Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Grace was always intense in everything she did. When she wrote her first book, she completely immersed herself in the emotions of the characters, in their sorrows and joys, as if every page were an extension of her own heart. She loved telling stories. It connected her to the world. But the truth is that behind the sweet words of the children's books she wrote, there was a universe of feelings that she kept just for herself. With Scott by her side, she found the kind of love every woman dreams of living: loyal, present, protective. He was the kind of man who opened the car door, who remembered important dates, who made coffee and brought it to her in bed when he knew she was having a creative block. He wasn't perfect, of course, but he was sincere. And that, for a long time, was enough. The two lived a quiet routine. They shared a beautiful and charming apartment. The walls were marked with photos from trips, notes stuck to the fridge, and drawings she received from children at literary fairs. It was a good life, but one built with care. Grace worked from home, and whenever she finished a chapter, she would rush to show it to Scott, who read it with shining eyes, as if he were in front of a bestseller. He believed in her more than she believed in herself. And this admiration, this constancy, this love without games, for some reason she couldn't quite understand, began to lose its shine inside her. That's when Brandon started showing up more often. A business partner of Scott's at the publishing house, he was the opposite of Scott in almost every way. He had a loud laugh, a carefree demeanor, and a gaze that seemed to decipher people's intentions effortlessly. He was the kind of man who talked to everyone and left everyone wanting to hear more. And Grace, who always had a thing for intensity, began paying more attention to him than she should have. At first, it was involuntary. It was just curiosity. A comment about a movie, a conversation about modern literature, a quick exchange of messages about some event. But deep down, she knew. She knew that this was taking up too much space inside her. She started comparing. Brandon seemed lighter, bolder, more alive. Scott was predictable, methodical, too gentle. Brandon was unpredictable, full of stories, surrounded by people, with that energy that made the room revolve around him. And that's what began to confuse Grace's feelings. She caught herself imagining what life would be like if she had chosen someone like Brandon instead of someone like Scott. They were quick thoughts, but they left traces. At night, when Scott fell asleep next to her, she stayed silent, eyes open, feeling the weight of a love that, in some way, had started to feel lukewarm compared to the excitement of doubt. On any given day, while having lunch together at the publishing office, Brandon complimented a passage from the new book she had sent by email. Grace smiled, like someone receiving a hidden flower in a public place. The feeling was good. Too good. And right there, in that ordinary exchange, the spark was born that she pretended not to notice. From then on, everything Brandon said took on a different meaning. When he laughed at her jokes, it felt like he laughed more than Scott did. When he complimented her hair tied in a bun, she thought twice before letting it down. When he said he needed to talk about something urgent, her heart raced, even without a real reason. At the same time, Grace tried to reconnect with Scott. She planned dinners at home, suggested outings, asked more about his work. But something always distracted her. It was as if, no matter how hard she tried to keep things as they were, part of her was already somewhere else. And that place had Brandon's name and face. She didn't say anything. She continued playing her role as a devoted wife, kept writing her stories, kept hugging Scott as if nothing was changing. But inside, everything had already changed. Doubt became her companion. The desire to experience what was forbidden grew every day. Grace tried to fight against it, but not hard enough. Because, in some strange and dangerous way, she liked the feeling. It was like living between two worlds, one that gave her stability and true love, and another that made her feel alive for the wrong reasons. What she didn't know, at that moment, was how much this silent choice would lead her to an irreversible abyss. And it all started there, with small thoughts she thought she could control. It all started quietly, as wrong things usually do. Grace and Brandon began exchanging messages frequently, first with professional justifications, then with inside jokes, off-hour comments, and conversations that stretched late into the night. The kind of dialogue she never had with Scott. It was slippery ground, and Grace, even though she knew it, stepped deeper. One day, at the end of a regular meeting, Brandon subtly but deliberately brushed his arm against hers. She felt a shiver that she chose to ignore, but the truth is, she liked it. Brandon knew exactly how to approach without seeming invasive. And Grace knew exactly what she was doing when she didn't pull away. The following week, he asked her to talk about a new project at a nearby cafe. They sat side by side, and between sips of coffee and scattered ideas, their eyes met for too long. On the way out, he kissed her. It was quick, but intense enough to leave a bitter taste in her conscience. She went home with her heart racing, trying to convince herself it had been just an impulse, something that needed to be forgotten. But deep down, she didn't want to forget. The memory of that kiss stayed with her for days. Scott even asked if she was okay. She said it was just exhaustion. He believed her. He always believed her. Grace began living in two worlds. In one, she remained the affectionate wife, present at family dinners, dedicated to her writing projects, full of love in her gaze. In the other, she made excuses to go out alone, met Brandon at strategic times, and pretended everything was under control. But it wasn't. The messages turned into calls, the meetings turned into routine. The worst happened when they started meeting in her and Scott's apartment. That space, which once represented love and partnership, became the scene of betrayal. Brandon said it was dangerous, but exciting. Grace said it was risky, but inevitable. The two were addicted to the adrenaline of hiding, lying, and deceiving. She wrote stories about courage and values, but lived a life full of contradictions. She started sleeping poorly. She spent hours staring at the ceiling, trying to find justifications to continue down that path. Sometimes she cried in the shower, angry at herself, but then dried her face, put on perfume, and replied to Brandon with a heart emoji. It was as if she were trapped in a cycle that, even though wrong, seemed impossible to break. Desire spoke louder than any guilt. The promises she made to Scott became empty words that she pretended still meant something. At times, she thought about confessing everything, about being honest, but cowardice won. She always found a way to delay. Brandon, on the other hand, seemed unconcerned about the consequences. He said everything would work out, that life wasn't so black and white. Grace believed him, or pretended to believe him to avoid facing what she already knew. She was hurting the only man who had ever truly been by her side. One night, after another secret meeting, Grace returned home and saw Scott sleeping on the couch, one of her books in his lap. That hurt. For a moment, she thought about waking him up and confessing everything. But instead, she covered him with a blanket and went to the bedroom in silence, carrying a weight that seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. She started realizing she no longer knew who she was. She was afraid to look in the mirror and see a stranger. The meetings with Brandon lost their charm. They still happened, but no longer brought the same excitement. Yet the confusion inside her was so great that Grace kept going, as if waiting for something external to happen to end what she herself had created. Perhaps, deep down, she wanted to get caught. As if it would free her from her own weakness. But she still had no idea that this wish would be granted in the worst possible way. Scott was always more observant than Grace imagined. Behind his calm gaze and gentle gestures, there was someone attentive, someone who noticed when words came late, when kisses were mechanical, when hugs lasted less than they used to. For weeks, he avoided asking direct questions. He preferred to wait. Not out of omission, but as a strategy. He believed some truths hurt less when exposed clearly and indisputably. And part of him, even without wanting to, already knew what was happening. The final straw fell on the day of the company event. An annual gathering that brought together partners, authors, investors, and employees of the publishing house. It was an important night, with scheduled speeches and celebrations for goals achieved. Grace was present as a guest of honor due to the success of her books, and Brandon, as always, was the center of attention. The event proceeded normally until Scott received a short message, sent by someone who chose not to identify themselves. "Look in the meeting room on the third floor." He set the glass down on the table and, without showing urgency, began searching for Brandon and Grace among the guests. He walked discreetly through the hallways, observing each group of conversations, every corner where they might be. He didn't find them in the main hall, nor on the terrace. When he realized both had disappeared from the main area, the alarm in his head took shape. His heart raced, but outwardly, he remained calm. Then, he decided to go upstairs. He went straight to the third floor. The meeting room door was slightly ajar, and from a distance, he could already see. Grace was with Brandon, too close, too intimate, far from any professional excuse. What he saw was exactly what his intuition had been screaming for weeks. Grace was with Brandon, too close, too intimate, far from any professional excuse. She looked at him surprised, her hand still resting on Brandon's chest. For a second, time froze. Scott didn't say a word. He picked up his phone, took a picture, and left. The image captured everything he needed to understand. The kind of photo that turns suspicions into evidence. The kind of image that marks the end of a story. Grace was paralyzed. Brandon tried to play it cool, but Scott's silence was more devastating than any confrontation. She came down a little later, still trembling, but found her husband smiling, talking to guests, as if nothing had happened. It was hard to believe he had seen what he saw. His calmness was strange, almost frightening. She tried to approach him, but he subtly moved away and headed to the stage, calling everyone for one last message before the night ended. With the microphone in hand, Scott thanked the collaborators, briefly spoke about the challenges of the year, and at the end, said he needed to share something personal. He asked everyone to look at the screen. The image appeared clearly. Grace and Brandon, together, in an intimate moment. A murmur spread through the room. Some people covered their mouths in shock. Others just shook their heads. Scott took a deep breath and stated, "This is the woman I've shared my life with for the past few years. And this is the man who claimed to be my best friend. As of today, I am no longer married. And this partnership ends now." Then, he thanked everyone and left the stage under a dense silence, as if the air had been sucked out of the room. Grace tried to leave discreetly, but the looks were heavy. Whispered comments followed her wherever she went. She tried to talk to Scott, but was ignored. Brandon was still there, visibly embarrassed. He tried to leave through the back door, but it was too late. Grace left the event without a clear direction. She tried to call a car through the app, but her hands were shaking so much that she had to try 3 times before confirming the ride. When the car arrived, she got in without saying a word. She asked only to be taken home, but halfway there, she told the driver to change the route. She couldn't bear to enter the apartment she shared with Scott, not after that. She went to a friend's house, Ashley, who lived in another neighborhood. She knocked on the door with swollen eyes, smudged makeup, and a phone full of notifications she didn't have the courage to open. Ashley, without understanding what was happening, opened the door and hugged her. Grace collapsed on the couch and cried for hours. That night, she slept in the living room, curled up, in silence, like someone who had just watched their entire world crumble. After stepping off the stage, Scott isolated himself at the back of the room. Some employees tried to approach him, offering support, but he simply thanked them with a restrained gesture. As soon as he had the chance, he left the venue, stopped by the house quickly just to grab some clothes, his laptop, and documents. Then, he drove to a hotel. In the room, He sat down and stared at the photo in silence for several minutes. He didn't cry, didn't break anything. He was numb. All he needed now was distance, peace, and time to reorganize his life. Before going to sleep, he sent the image and a brief explanation to the company's directors and to the lawyer who would handle the dissolution of the partnership with Brandon. Meanwhile, Brandon left the event alone and under hostile stares. He tried to maintain his composure, but inside, he was panicking. When he reached the parking lot, several guests were still loudly discussing, some shaking their heads, others laughing in disbelief. He got into his car with a hot and sweaty face. He drove to his apartment, where he lived alone. As soon as he arrived, he locked all the doors, turned off his phone, and threw his jacket on the floor. For the first time in a long while, he felt real fear. Not for the scandal itself, but for the consequences he knew would follow. He knew he would lose Scott as a friend, partner, and reference. He knew it would ruin his professional image. He tried to call Grace, but the call went straight to voicemail. He tried again. Nothing. He spent the night awake, staring at the phone, waiting for a response that never came. For the first time, he realized he had gotten involved in a game he didn't know how to end. And that perhaps he had ended up alone. The morning after the scandal, still at the hotel, Scott drafted an email directly to the IT department of the publishing house. He requested the immediate blocking of Grace and Brandon's access to the company's systems and ordered that their entry badges be deactivated. He didn't want to risk seeing them wandering around there again. Within a few hours, both were officially excluded from any ties with the publishing house. The days passed with a heavy silence dominating everything. Scott stayed at the hotel, without giving updates, without responding to messages, without showing any intention of personally resolving what had been left behind. He chose distance as a way to preserve what remained of himself. He didn't want to see Grace. He didn't want to hear her voice. He just wanted distance. He spent the nights in the room, reviewing documents, guiding lawyers, and making decisions that once seemed unthinkable. The calm and gentle man had been replaced by someone pragmatic, focused on cutting ties and rebuilding his own path without allowing himself to falter. Grace, on the other hand, lacked the same clarity. In the first few days, she stayed at her friend's house, aimless, without the courage to return to the apartment. She tried calling Scott more than once. The phone rang, but he never answered. She even recorded a message, asking to talk, saying she needed to see him at least once. The words remained in the void. Tired of waiting, she finally decided to go back home. When she opened the door, she found the place silent. Everything was in the same place, but there was a sense of abandonment. It didn't feel like an absence of hours, but of days. It was as if Scott had left long ago, as if he had erased his presence from there. She left her suitcase in the corner and decided to stay, hoping that at some point, he would show up. She made coffee, turned on the lights, opened the windows. She tried to fill the space with some hope. But Scott didn't return. Time passed, days turned into weeks, and he stayed away. Then came the contact from the lawyers. Scott had initiated the divorce process and wanted to resolve everything quickly. The bureaucratic part was fast. Since the publishing house was registered in Scott's name before the marriage, there was no division of the business. The only thing Grace was entitled to was half the value of the apartment, nothing more. All the main assets were protected by contract. And there was no room for negotiation. In addition, Scott filed a lawsuit against Brandon for breach of fiduciary duty, supported by the duty of loyalty, a legal obligation requiring business partners to always act in the best interest of the company and the partnership. Brandon, by getting involved with the partner's wife and using the company's resources to facilitate their meetings, had violated that duty. The case moved quickly. The public scandal helped strengthen the argument. Brandon was ordered to pay a significant compensation for moral and commercial damages, in addition to the breach of trust in the partnership. That was a definitive blow for him. Both Grace and Brandon became rejected figures in the editorial world. Publishing houses cut ties. Events were cancelled. Even their social media followers disappeared. They tried, each in their own way, to explain, soften, justify. Nothing worked. Their credibility evaporated. Invitations vanished. The two became synonymous with betrayal and downfall. The months went by, and while the two faced the consequences, Scott rebuilt himself. He kept the publishing house running with double dedication. He launched new authors, bet on unknown talents, and strengthened the company's reputation. Curiously, the scandal that destroyed Grace and Brandon brought visibility to the publishing house. Scott's image as the victim of a cruel betrayal sparked empathy from the public. Bookstores began highlighting the company's titles. Sales skyrocketed. The company grew faster than in the previous 3 years. Scott didn't celebrate publicly, but inside, he knew he had won. Not just in the legal or business field, but especially in the decision to cut off everything that was holding him back. He chose to start over with dignity. And he succeeded. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.